So in Matthew 5:5, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." And I don't think many people in the world today consider meekness to be a positive character trait. Can you imagine someone running for a political office and saying, "A vote for me is for the meekest candidate"? Or someone like motivational speaker Tony Robbins saying, "Let me show you how you can be empowered by being meek." I just don't think people are going to line up for that one. Meekness as a valued character trait is a really tough sell in our world today. You're not going to see it trending on social media anytime soon. Even Webster puts a negative spin on the definition of the word meekness. According to Webster, meekness means deficient in spirit and courage, spineless, not strong. Kind of like the character, if you're familiar with the movie Back to the Future, of George McFly in this scene right here.
Hey, McFly! What do you think you're doing?
Biff.
Hey, I'm talking to you, McFly, you Irish bug.
Oh, hey, Biff. Hey, guys. How are you doing?
Yeah, you got my homework finished, McFly?
Well, actually, I figured since it wasn't due till Monday.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Hey, think, McFly, think. I gotta have time to recopy it. You realize what would happen if I hand in my homework in your handwriting? I'll get kicked out of school. You wouldn't want that to happen, would you? Would you?
Well, now, of course not,
No,
Biff. I wouldn't
no.
want that to happen.
What are you looking at, butthead?
Hey, Biff, get hold of this guy's life preserver. Dork thinks he's gonna drown.
Yeah. So, how about my homework, McFly?
Okay, Biff. Well, I'll finish that on up tonight, and then I'll bring it over first thing tomorrow morning.
Hey, not too early. I sleep in Sundays. Oh, McFly, your shoes untied. Don't be so gullible, McFly.
Okay.
I don't want to see you in here again.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Raise your hand if you want to be like George McFly. I thought so. And yet, God says, blessed, happy are meek people, because they will inherit the earth. We started a new series last week called Power, and Brian kicked it off by telling us that how power is often used in our world to control and manipulate others for self-gain. But in God's economy, God's countercultural, upside-down economy, we're supposed to use whatever power we have, and we all have a measure of power, for the benefit of others. And we learned that the best use of that power is to be positively influential on anyone that crosses our path. And to emphasize this biblical teaching, Brian quoted Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 through 7. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Messiah Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, remember, he emptied himself, the kenosis of emptying himself. He left all that divine stuff behind. He made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And so today's message is titled The Power of Meekness. And as you'll soon see, meekness is the posture we are to have while exercising our power. Take another look at this passage in Matthew 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. This is about taking possession of the land. And we find many similar teachings in the Hebrew Scriptures that says something very similar. Psalm 37, verse 11 is just one of them. It says, the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And notice the way to receive this land is simply by being meek. If we are meek, we will inherit the earth. And of course, these verses are referring to a time in the future when God will establish his eternal kingdom on earth. Now, typically, when we think about acquiring any kind of a possession, we usually think of exerting our power aggressively. We have to work harder than the next person. We've got to be smarter. We've got to be tougher, craftier, and sometimes we even have to take it by force. And we've created survivalist-like idioms, power idioms, like it's a dog-eat-dog world, to the victor go the spoils, only the strong survive, and it's every person for themselves. Even author J.K. Chesterton says, the full value of this life can only be got by fighting. The violent take it by storm. And he's speaking metaphorically here, but I think you get the gist of what he really means. But in God's countercultural, upside-down, topsy-turvy world, all we have to do to be blessed right now and then inherit everything that God has to offer us in the future is to be meek. Blessed or happy are the meek right now, for they will inherit in the future the earth. Meekness is the position, the posture of true power. And so it's important. So let's dive a little deeper into biblical meekness and see if we can resolve maybe some of the confusion around what meekness looks like. The Greek word used in that sentence for meek in Matthew 5:5 is the word praus. And it was used in classical Greek literature as an adjective to modify nouns like medications, words, winds, physicians, and even animals. And each of the nouns used in this list have a high level of power that can be dangerous and even deadly if used improperly. Medications can be toxic. Words can be damaging. Winds, as we saw this past week from Hurricane Michael, can be devastating. Physicians can be uncaring. And wild animals can prove to be deadly. But when you modify them with the adjective praus, they become something like soothing medications, calming words, gentle winds, tender physicians, and tamed animals. And in each of these cases, the adjectives that are used to modify each noun tells us that the potential danger of their power is now safely under control. And power under control is the true biblical definition of what it means to be meek. The best way to think of this is to imagine a wild horse, beautiful, powerful, full of spirit, unbroken, but dangerous, kind of like in this video right here. I wanted to put the Rolling Stones' Wild Horses Couldn't Drag Me Away, but I felt silence was better. Okay. And the purpose of taming a wild horse is not to take away its beauty, it's not to reduce its power, or even to break its spirit. The purpose of taming a horse is to get it under the control of its master. Still beautiful, still powerful, still full of spirit, but now when the master pulls the reins to the left, he turns to the left. When he pulls the reins to the right, he turns to the right, like in this video. And with this tamed nature picture in mind, here's an even more comprehensive definition of biblical meekness, okay? Biblical meekness is an absolute surrender of our will to God's will. When we surrender our will to God's will, we are still beautiful, still powerful, still full of spirit. At least you should be. You shouldn't lose any of those things when you come to faith. In fact, they should be better than they were. But now when God pulls the reins of our lives to the left, we go left. And when he pulls the reins of our lives to the right, we go right. And so in this beatitude, Jesus is simply saying that blessed people are people whose power is under God's control. They are people who surrender their will to God's will, even when it may not make sense at the moment. So let me give you a few examples in my life. Andrew and I met the Lord in around 1982, and I eventually went on staff at that church, and I loved that church. It was in Irvine, California. It is the kind of church you'd want to be forever. I wanted to be there forever. It was a good job. It paid well. I loved all the people. Our kids grew up with together with a lot of kids that went to that church. But somewhere around 1993, God began to stir us a little bit. It surprised us. And for about a 2-week period, we began to kind of see what was out there. And 3 churches kind of surfaced. One of them was here. It was a little church called Dayspring Christian Fellowship. It really wasn't a church at that point. It was kind of more like a study group. And when we kind of weighed the 3 churches, all 3 ended up into kind of an offer to come out. One was in Amherst, New Hampshire. One was in somewhere by D.C. area, and one was here. The other 2 made a whole lot of sense because they had some money. They had a little bit of traction. It was like those were good places to go. But God, I don't know how you kind of figure things out. We had like this column. On this side, on the left side, was a column of things that don't make sense, reasons not to do this. But then God did a bunch of things on the column of how do we see God working? And it was like that list was down to here, and a lot of it was just really supernatural stuff. So by the end of a period of time, Andrew and I both looked at each other. And by the way, our leaders at our church back there said, don't go to Boulder. This is not a healthy church. They don't have very much money. There's a lot of ththings wrong with this. But we heard clearly from God that if we didn't go, we'd be out of his will. And we're just dumb enough to say we don't think there's any place better to be than in God's will, even if it doesn't make sense. So we came. And turns out it was a mistake. No, just kidding. A couple years later, we changed our name to Cornerstone Church, and we had been meeting at schools all the way up through 1999. All of a sudden, the 6 people that were meeting in this church, yes, there were 6 people. They used to sit right in a wood pew right there as the preacher would preach to them every Sunday. It was very awkward. They reached out to us. We were about 150 people at the time, and they said, we need some revenue. This place is a mess. Would you consider renting this? We'll go meet downstairs. You guys meet in here. We began to talk. And there were a lot of reasons not to do it. I'll give you just one. There's all kinds of things in the list of this doesn't make sense. Let me tell you, there were a lot of things. One of it was that they had some severe water damage in the children's wing. And there was actually mushrooms growing out of the carpet, and there was a Chinese church actually meeting in that room. Nobody was smart enough to take the mushrooms out of the carpet. But we estimated what it would take just to get in here, just to make it usable, and it came out to about $300,000. The prior year, we were meeting at Burbank Middle School, and we said, well, I'm getting tired. We're all getting tired. It's been 6 years schlepping stuff in. We had a trailer that I drove every Sunday and set up all the equipment with a few people, and it was getting tiring. And so we did a building fund. Back then, most of our people were young college students or young adults. At the end of the year, we raised a whopping $600. Serious. A whole year, $600. And so we bought a tough shed. And we put it on the school campus. They let us put it there, and we stored our audio-visual equipment. That was our first church building, by the way, a tough shed. Well, unbeknownst that we were talking to this group, a couple came to visit us, and the husband had started a business. They had about a $4 million investment, and within 16 months, he sold it for $50 million. And he came in and he handed us a check, opened it up, and it's $278,000. Now, we've never had anything like that before, nothing like it since. And of course, I'm complaining to God, we're about $12,000 short. Where's the miracle in that? But we were just stupid enough to say, we believe God wants us to do this. And there was a whole bunch of things in the column of God working. We did it. We thought we were just going to rent the place. At the end of the discussion, these 6 people come to us, and they give us the title, and they say, hey, this place is free and clear. It's yours. Who plans a free building in their 5-year vision statement? And then last year, I began to hear from God, and Andrea hearing from God, that maybe it's time to kind of hand the main leadership over to Brian now. I really wasn't ready. I mean, I got a lot of good years in me, but there was just a lot of things. There were a lot of things in the doesn't make sense column, but there were a lot of things in God's working column that made it sound that just like in every other situation, when we looked at each other, we said, if we don't do this, we'll be out of God's will. But look, I mean, look at this place. From about 30 people to about 1,200 people doing amazing things with an amazing staff. Someone like Brian, where do you get a guy like Brian to just show up at a church to have so much depth and capability? I mean, that made it an easy handoff. None of these examples that I gave you made sense at the moment. But by stepping out in faith and surrendering our will to God's will, we've experienced unimaginable blessings. And so have all of you, and so has the city, and so has the world, and people like Carla, and so many other people that we've been able to just bless. Could never have imagined this 25 years ago. William Booth says it well. Listen to this, I love this. The greatness of our power is the measure of our surrender. The more you surrender, the more power you actually have. That does not preach well in the world. Surrendered people, when armies surrender, who says surrendering is a good value? And yet, when we surrender our will to God's will, it's the best version of ourselves. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into this, okay? Things like work and school and relationships and raising families and managing our finances and keeping our cars running and staying healthy have a tendency to wear us down, don't they? I mean, it's hard. Life can be overwhelming, and especially these days, if you factor in all the political junk that's taking place today. And so here in this text, in Matthew 11:28, Jesus invites all those who worn out and are worn down to come to him. And he promises that they will find rest. But not just any kind of rest, right? This is a rest that transcends physical exhaustion. This is the kind of rest that's not disrupted by what's taking place around us or in the world. This is a rest that seeps deep down into the recesses of our souls. There is no sleeping medications for this kind of rest. But notice, in order to receive it, Jesus invites us to do two things. Number one, he invites us to come to him. And number two, he invites us to become yoked with him. And so this is really an invitation to let Jesus reign and rule in every aspect of our lives, every moment of our lives. And make sure you notice how Jesus is not like any other king who rules and reigns, because Jesus rules and reigns our lives from a position of meekness and humility. Come to me, all those who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for I am meek and humble. In other words, Jesus' power is always under God's control. He's always completely submitted to the will of his Father. And so when God says to him, go to the left, he goes to the left. And God says, go to the right, he goes to the right. This is what John 5:19 is basically saying. Jesus says, I don't do anything on my own. Nothing on my own. I only do what I see my Father doing. When I see my Father doing something, like I'm just walking down the street and God says, go touch that man right there. I'll touch him. I'll heal him. That's that what God wants to do. If God says, go share your faith with this person, I'll do that. If God says, go to this city, I'll go to that city. Jesus does nothing on his own. Nothing. He's completely surrendered to his dad. Even the night before his gruesome death on the cross, he agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane about what God had laid before him. And he said, Dad, I don't want to do this. There's got to be a different way. Take this from me. And even began to sweat drops of blood. It was so stressful to him. Don't ever think it was easy for Jesus to climb up there. But because he was meek, not a milquetoast, not wimpy, not deficient in courage, just the opposite. Because he was meek and because his power was under his Father's control, he says, yet not my will, but your will be done. That's what true biblical meekness looks like. And Jesus personified it. He had total and complete power to walk away from it, couldn't he? Right? He could have got out of that garden and just disappeared into the night. But he didn't. Instead, he submitted his will to God's will. Peter Kreeft says it so well. He says, to see what meekness is, you must look not at meekness, but at Jesus, at Yeshua. Saying meekness is this or that sends you to concepts which are pale copies of reality. Saying Jesus is meek sends you to the living reality of it. Howard Carter says it this way: meekness is hanging on the cross when you could have summoned legions of angels to destroy us all. Meekness is Jesus. And because this experience was so incredibly beyond challenging for him, he's not your typical power-hungry king. He's not an oppressive king. He's an empathetic, sympathetic king who truly gets what it means for us to be worn out and worn down by life. And he wants to rule and reign in our lives in such a way that whatever we face on the outside of our lives won't rattle us on how we feel on the inside of our lives. He wants to give us rest for our souls. And so looking again at Matthew 11, 28 and 29, Jesus invites us both to come to him, but also to place ourselves under his yoke as well. If you're not familiar with a yoke, it's a wooden device that joins plowing oxen together. By yoking the two oxen together, it increases the efficiency of their work. It also reduces the burden of their work. Remember Ecclesiastes says 2 are better than 1, for you get a good return for your work. And here's a video of what that looks like. And I like this video because I think it creates a right visual, because for me, the guy driving the oxen with a whip represents the harshness of this world. Can you see that? That's how the world treats us. We can't make that go away. No matter what we do, we can't move far enough away from it. We can't earn enough money to escape it. We can't pray enough. We'll always live under the whip of this world. But when we yoke ourselves with Jesus, he takes those blows for us so that we can experience a supernatural rest for our souls. You can take that off. About 30 years ago, Andrew and I visited some impoverished and oppressed families in Kenya. And even though these people had nothing and lived in oppressive conditions, they were so gracious, so hospitable. They even fed us what little food they did have. And so we said to them at some point, you have almost nothing. You live in such harsh conditions, and yet you're so loving and generous and peaceful. How do you do it? And I'll never forget this. One of the women looked at us right in the eye, and she said, Gene, when Jesus is all you have, Jesus is all you need. When Jesus is all you have, Jesus is all you need. It's a hard concept for us to get here in our bubble in Boulder. Her words, and more importantly, the lives of those meek people, impacted me in an incredible way, even to this day. And so Jesus says, come to me. If you're weary, if you're worn out and worn down, I'll give you rest. But that's not enough. Take my yoke then. Get under my yoke with me, because I'm meek and I'm humble, and you will find rest for your souls. But look what the next sentence says. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is saying here is you submit your power under my control. As you say, not my will, but your will. As you live in meekness, yoked to the meekest king who ever lived. Jesus is going to lead you in such a way that may not be easy. It may not even make sense at the moment. It may be nothing that you ever had in mind for your life, but you won't feel overwhelmed or burdened because you'll be doing it together. One more quote. John Martin says, meekness is our strength. Meekness is our authority. Meekness is our power, because it is the strength and power and authority of Christ. Self is gone. Jesus reigns. In him we live and move and have our very being. Amen? We are the most powerful versions of ourselves. We are the most powerful versions of ourselves when we surrender our will to God's will. You cannot be more powerful and influential. And so I'd like to end with an exercise that maybe you will adopt into your life. I've been doing this for a while, and I'd like you to stand up to do it. And if you can, stand, and if you can, close your eyes. Do so, please. And then do whatever you need to do to quiet your mind and your heart. Just take a couple breaths. Just relax your body a little bit. And as you do that, acknowledge that Jesus is here in this room. He's with us. He promises to never leave us. He's with us wherever we go. But he wants more. He's inviting you to more than just being with you, right? Imagine Jesus inviting you now to come to him. And so see yourself moving to Jesus. I mean, really just picture moving to Jesus. And as you get closer, you see he's wearing this wooden device called a yoke. And he's saying, come on, come under with me. And see yourself getting into that yoke. And then hear him saying to you, I want you to join me. Let's spend the day together. Let's go change the world. Let's go do amazing things. Let's listen to my dad because he's working. He's always working. And I don't do anything. If you're going to go with me, I don't do anything on my own. I only go do what my Father says. And so as we spend our day together, yoked together, we're going to be looking to see where the Father's working. Did you see it in your mind a little bit? Now imagine a day like that. Okay, let's lower the bar. Imagine an hour of your day like that. And so what I do as the day goes on and I lose sight that I'm with Jesus, and it's like I've taken off the yoke and I've gone my own way, and God knows all the things I'm doing. I go back through that exercise and I get myself yoked with Jesus. I say, well, let's do it again. I'm telling you, there's no more exciting way to live your life. He will take you to places and to things and to events that you've never even dreamed of. And so in the words of this song, the chorus is, I am your anchor in the wind and the waves. I am your steadfast, so don't be afraid. Though your heart and flesh may fail you, I'm your faithful strength. I am with you wherever you go. Come to me. I'm all you need. Come to me. I'm your everything. Let's worship together.